Judges chapter 6, if you want to go there. Flip there, scroll there. All right, I don't know if anybody of you read, because I don't think we gave out the homework last week. I don't think we said specifically that you got to read this chapter, but if you've ever heard a handful of Bible stories kind of thing, this might be a story that you've heard. You won't be surprised, but I'm going to get you guys to help me tell the story. The end of chapter 6 has this famous story, okay? And it is, can anybody guess what it's about? Huh? Close. Fleece. Thank you. Okay. The fleece. Some of you guys will remember this story. Gideon. This is about the prophet Gideon. Matt talked about Deborah and Barak. We're getting into some of these characters, and pretty soon we're going to talk about Samson, probably the most famous out of this book. So Gideon is this week and probably next week. Gideon gets nervous. Gideon puts out a fleece on the ground, and he's praying to God. You know the story? You remember what happens? What's the main component of this story? What's he do? He does not catch it on fire. What's the opposite of that? It's soaked in water. He prays, and it says, God, give me a sign. And he puts out a fleece on the ground. Obviously, maybe not a name brand fleece, right? But the idea of the wool and the sheep and all that kind of stuff, he puts this fleece out on the ground, and the next morning, the whole ground is dry. There's no dew on the ground. But this fleece is soaking wet. And it says, I believe, he wrung it out and filled a bowl of water. Don't know how big the bowl was, but that's a substantial amount of moisture in this material for it to, fill up a bowl of water. And then what happens? Remember? The opposite, right. And in fact, not just the opposite, but what does he say? Look in verse 36 if you got your Bible or your phone open. I think it's 36. That's where it starts. Verse 39. Somebody read 6:39.
Then Gideon said to God, let not your anger burn against me. Let me speak just once more. Please let me test just once more. Please let it be dry and fleece only, and on the ground, lest there be dew.
The opposite is true. He says, let the ground be wet this time, but the material laying out there for some reason is going to be completely dry. But when he starts the verse or that prayer off with is, please don't be mad at me. In other words, you've already given me this sign the night before, but please don't be mad at me. Don't hold this against me, but I'm just not sure yet. I need another sign. I need another miracle. And sure enough, the opposite happens, and he shows it to him. Okay, well, that's the end of chapter 6. The fleece story shows the fact that he had to ask twice. The theme of it is fear. He was not willing to go forward. They're actually going into battle. I don't blame him one bit, but that's the idea, is that he's scared, he's fearful. All right, well, we see that theme other places in this chapter. So look in verse 11, if you will. Six 11. Yeah, read that, please.
Now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the terebinth at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash as Azarite, while his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites.
Okay, verse 11 says he was under a tree, he was hiding in a winepress to beat out the wheat. A little context here. I got up a couple weeks ago here and I was kind of negative. These people don't know what's going on. They're really, in a bad spot and all that kind of stuff. And maybe I was too negative. But chapter 6, verse 1 says they were still doing what was evil in the sight of the Lord. We're still going through these cycles. Deborah, Barak, they had good years and they had bad years. But anyway, they were serving, verse 1 says, they were serving Midian for 7 years. And then it gets even worse. In verse 2, it says that they were hiding in caves and in the mountains. Verse 3 says when Israel would try to plant crops, the Midianites would come and destroy the crops. Verse 4 says that they don't have any ox, sheep, or donkey left. Let me just explain what's going on here. This is the classic thing in a movie that you've seen where someone's in a castle and they're held up in there and you can't overtake them. You don't have strong enough stuff to battering rams and all that stuff. So what do? What's the old military tactic? If you can't beat your enemy, what do? You starve them out. You surround the castle, cut off their supply chains or whatever, and eventually, right, they are going to die out. They're going to go extinct. They've been serving Midian for 7 years. At some point, Midian is going to try to say, we got to exterminate these people. So they've literally taken away sheep, donkey, and ox. Some explanation of that verse says, it basically means they didn't have animals to eat, and they didn't have animals to work the land. And then when they did work the land, when they did get something planted, they came and trampled it and destroyed it. So like this is desperation, all right? That's a little context to what Alex just read in verse 11, which was, he was beating wheat in a wine press. Does that go together? Those two things? No, that's weird. Why would you do that? Maybe it wasn't the season for actually picking grapes, stomping them out in a wine press, doing the juice thing. Instead, he goes to a place that doesn't seem likely to smack the wheat, get the chaff, separate, all that kind of stuff. And I'm assuming to try to make something to eat. Bread being, I'm assuming that was the process. But the reality or the obvious thing was he was doing it in a weird spot that didn't make sense. So he was doing it out of fear. They were trying to kill him. It makes sense, but it was still, this common thread that we're seeing in this whole chapter of fear. I think I put up here, verse 11, it is about fear, but it's also about doing something smart. He was trying to save his people, or maybe just serve his family, maybe just make something for himself. We don't know who, what the wheat was going for, but the fact is, it seems like a wise thing to do to try to get away from these people that were trying to kill him. So verse 15, skip down a little bit more, see what another example of this. Someone read verse 15, please.
And he said, "Oh God, what do I say to Israel? See, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house."
All right, an angel of the Lord, verse 11, comes to appear to him, and they have this conversation. Verse 15, his response is, how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in this tribe, and I am the least in my father's house. You picked the wrong guy, is what he's saying. This reminded me of Moses. God says to Moses, you're going to be my leader, you're going to be my rescuer. And he's like, no. I don't speak well. I'm not the leader you're looking for. Gideon kind of says the same thing. You're talking to the wrong guy. What's interesting, though, is a few verses later, he says, how can you say that I'm going to rise up to this when you haven't been faithful to us? You remember a couple weeks ago, I think I really pointed this out to you, Walt. A couple weeks ago, I was up here and I said that how do you talk about what God has done to the next generation if there's nothing to talk about, right? And if they didn't pass it on, how would we be sitting here today if the faithfulness to God didn't get passed on? He questions them. He says, how can God be faithful to me if all these stories I'm hearing aren't coming true? They're getting oppressed. They're almost dead, for crying out loud. Well, verse 15, that's his response. We're the weakest in our tribe, and I'm the least in my father's house. He's like the runt. I'm assuming he's the smallest, the weakest, the youngest, whatever you want to call it. He said, I'm the least in my father's house, the least capable. Again, not willing to go ahead with what he's supposed to do out of fear, right? But another thing, the track record. He's saying that comment because he knows that God has not been faithful. Even though he's heard these stories, it hasn't come true in this situation, and he's desperate for an answer. All right, one more example of fear. If you flip to verse 27. He got another bit of instructions in verse 27. So verse 25, God said to him, take your father's bull, the second bull, pull down the altar that your father has, and cut down the Asherah pole. And what happens in verse 27? Somebody read that.
So Gideon took 10 men of his servants and did as the Lord had told him, but because he was too afraid of his family and the men of the town to do it by day, he did it by night.
All right. He was too afraid of his family and the men of his town to do it by day, so he did it by night. Again, he's sort of paralyzed by fear, but he's not. He actually goes through with it, and he did it. He was intentional. He took his 10 guys. He followed the instructions that God gave him, but measured. He had a little bit of wisdom about him. If I don't want to get attacked, it was his dad's altar and his dad's Asherah pole. You guys know what an Asherah pole is? Okay, for lack of a better application and whatnot, I picture some of the tribes maybe in Africa that do a wooden pole that's got carvings on it. It's got paint sometimes. It's tall. The dude climbs to the top of it. That's what I picture sometimes because we know it's wood. His instructions are go cut it down and burn it. Make that your altar, ironically enough. Use that thing to that God to use as a campfire to your God. And I'm all for campfires all the time. But His dad built that. His dad created that altar. At some point, his resources provided that. So he's scared of him. Kind of makes sense. He's scared of him. But he still pushes through, and he actually follows through with that action. So that was kind of quick. I know we went through the chapter quick, but those 3 verses stood out to me because it still painted the picture of Gideon's, not his lack of action, because he sort of went through with it, but his trepidation, his hesitation, all right? So what does he do? What's his next action? After verse 27, then we get down to verse 33. It's one thing to be scared, but what do you do with it? All the Midianites, verse 33, all the Midianites, Amalekites, and the people of the east came together. They crossed the Jordan, they camped. All the people that are against them are all drawing together and coming to attack them. Not good. Verse 34, but the Spirit of the Lord clothed Gideon. What do your translations say in there for that phrase?
Came on Gideon.
God's Spirit came on Gideon, okay? Anybody else? All right, I thought there were some other ones. God's Spirit, God's strength, God's presence, clothed, came on, was over him, and he sounded the trumpet, and the Abzarites were called out to follow him. And he sent messengers throughout Manasseh, and they were to come follow him. He sent messengers to Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali to come follow him, and they went up to meet them. What I thought was interesting about that was Gideon's got fear. Gideon doesn't think he's the right guy for the job. He doesn't think that God's going to help him out. And what does he do? He sounds the alarm, the trumpet, right? Other translations say it was the shofar, ram's horn. Number 2, he gets other people together. 2, 3. He gets other people together, join up, we need some help. And then number 3, they go. And they're preparing for battle. So I guess this is kind of convicting to me because I started thinking about the times that you get together with somebody else for a common cause. He sounded the alarm, he communicated, he got with them, and then they took action. They got with it. Last week, I think we were all in here, and Don and Kim sat back there, and they asked everybody, please come help with whatever the miracle ball was last week. And then Don said, we're going to do a high school event. We need some help. April 29th at Camp Hope, we need some help. These announcements, right? Come and join up with other people. And I don't know, think about this. When's the last time that you got with other people for a common cause that was a little bit unique? It makes me think of like Passover coming up. We made the announcements, we sounded the alarm, we're asking you guys come to this thing. It's going to be, here at the gathering, bring a few bucks for a nice meal. But it is odd. It's still something different, but it's still something so special, but you get to join with other people and do it together, and you won't forget it. It's something that's become pretty meaningful for a handful of people here in Arabi, Louisiana. I don't know, think of an example that you got with other people and you did something unique, and more people, strength in numbers, and it was special. Can you think of something? In December, I went to Santa on the Bayou. You guys heard of that event? I'm sure there's always signs up and whatnot. There was probably 50 people there, volunteers. Why? I have no idea. I was there thinking to myself, how did they get all these people here? They're all dressed in elf costumes, by the way. They all bought presents. They wrapped presents. They're walking around like elves. They had boy, girl, age-appropriate gifts. They grilled hot dogs and hamburgers. They're all dressed up special. They're giving their time for free. They're a whole Saturday evening, and they're all down there. And I think like 300 kids came through in cars, and they fed them all. And I just remember looking around like, man, they got some stroke. They got some pull to get all these people down here for this event and to pull it off. But I also thought they had a common cause. They came together. They were recruited, and they took action. They did it. None of us were here necessarily, and I got paid to be there. But it was an interesting thing. But it begs the question. This was life and death. Christmas, Santa on the Bayou is not life and death. But I wanted to ask you that question because I think the most rewarding times in life, arguably, are sometimes the one that you did something that was a little bit risky. It might have been with other people that you remembered, because that's the old word liminality, where you experience something together and you share it, and other people that weren't there don't understand it. But you got to be invited. So let's back up one step, because the reality is that's in a group setting. Gideon's the leader here. Verse 36, he steps away and he has this moment of prayer and he throws out the material on the grass and he asks God for some help. I'm bringing this up because it's one thing to be asked by a person that's already got a harebrained idea to do something together as a group, right? It's a whole other thing to think that you got to do something and you are scared out your mind and you're not sure if you can do it. So he puts this out there as a prayer on the ground, and they're all ready for battle, and they have to wait till the next morning to do something. And what happens the next day? They don't do it. Why? Because he's still scared, and he has to pray, and it says they waited another night. And it kind of makes me wonder, was there somebody in the group that's like, come on, dude, let's go. Let's pull the trigger. You got me out here. We're all ready to go. There's the enemy. I mean, we don't kind of wonder what was going on, but we know that another night passed for him to put the second one out there to ask the question, is it going to happen? Are you really with me, God? I brought 2 fleeces today that look somewhat similar to each other. Navy blue, half zipper, whatever you want to call it. This fancy thing here is an Old Navy, and I've had it since high school. And I wear it all the time. I noticed, and plenty of people have pointed out, it's got like a hole in the back. I think a spark at a campfire hit it or something. So when you wear a white shirt underneath, it's pretty obvious, okay? This nice thing here, someone bought that for me for Christmas a couple years ago. I never wear it. It hangs in my closet, no exaggeration. I wore it one time this year, okay? I probably wore this 10 times this winter so far. This thing's a little too warm, whatever, but it's name brand. And like nicer, right? High school was 20-some years ago. I wear this thing all the time, and I don't know why. I don't know if I'm worried because this, nice brand name is on it. I don't know if it's nicer, and this has got a hole and a stain on the back, and this is why I stick to that. But I don't know. I don't know if I'm self-conscious because this has got a label, and this is crusty, and it needs to be replaced kind of thing. I don't know why I do that. But I bring up the word label because that's my question this morning to you is what's the label that's put on you? What label has God put on you? What label have you put on you? And this is why I'm asking that. Because in verse 11, before God directly spoke to him, verse 11, the angel of the Lord came and sat under the oak tree or elm tree at Ophrah while Gideon was beating out the wheat. We already read that. Verse 12, the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, the Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor. And Gideon said to him, please, if the Lord is with us, why has this all happened to us? And then remember verse 15, his argument back to him, how could this happen? My clan is the weakest. I am the least in my father's house. Gideon labeled himself, right? I am the least. We are the least. How could this happen? The label or the name that he called him, mighty man of valor or valiant warrior is another way. The word means strength, ability, wealth, or large army force. So Gideon thought he was not capable, not the best of the best and all that kind of stuff. But God directly spoke to him through an angel, through his messenger, and called him strong, called him able, called him wealthy, and called him a strong army force. Sounds like 2 different perspectives, if you ask me. This printed off this article from Skip Moen, and he commented on this, Judges 6. This is what he said. That idea, the life of a warrior, is not limited to the Napoleons, the General Pattons, or the Schwarzkopfs. The life of the warrior is found where God is present in a person. Gideon's story is the story of God's incredible strength in the least likely of humans. The angel knew that something incredibly important needed to be said. The life of the warrior, get this, the life of the warrior is a life of spiritual proximity, not human potential. Drawing close to God is the only way for a true warrior. I would add in there not just human potential, but human perfection. Let me say it again. The life of a true warrior is about spiritual proximity, as opposed to human potential or perfection. Again, the question for you is, what label have you put on yourself? Or what label does society put on you? Am I embarrassed because I don't want to wear something fancy and people think I'm high society or something like that? What label has somebody put on you? Human potential says, do I have the right degrees on the wall? Am I the right size? Have I been in the gym enough? Do I look right? Do I have the best grades? Am I the best presenter? We see that in Moses. Do I have the best voice? Do I have the best personality? What do I need to work on myself? Blah, 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 blah. All this potential, all these questions about that. But I don't know about you. I find myself questioning myself constantly and saying, are all those things right? But I don't think God asks for right and perfect, does he? Gideon flat out said to him, I'm the youngest and I'm the weakest. And the guy said to him, no, you are a strong, valiant warrior. That's something I have stewed on in my own life. And this has been constant conversations. I remember with Matt and Abby when I worked here, and with Shauna constantly, man, why do you think this or whatever? And I don't think that's just true of me. We all see ourselves in a certain perspective, not only the mirror in the morning, but also what people have said about you or what you think about yourself. So my encouragement or my challenge today is Gideon was used, we're going to see in the next verse or the next chapter, Gideon was used in a powerful way to defeat this army, the one that he had such trepidation about going and facing. But not only did God take him out and do it, he made him do it with less and less soldiers, if you remember that thing about the 300. We're going to play a song that I want you to listen to, sing along to if you want. And right after that, Abby's going to give announcements. But let's pray before we listen to this song. Father, we know that our society's got a lot of labels. The fleece is up here, Old Navy, cheapo, and North Face fancy. Maybe is a good representation this morning that we tell ourselves a lot of things. Society tells us a lot of things. Would you help us maybe redefine ourselves or our capabilities this morning through your power? Go back to that phrase, valiant warrior. And we know in Scripture you said, kingdom of priests. Please take who we are, who you've wired us to be, and the experiences that you've given us. Make us into who you want us to be. Help us, please, to go through the doors that you want us to go through. Amen. Let me give you one more example. Can I put that other picture up there before the song? So we sent the email out last week, the gathering newsletter saying, pray for Ron. Ron passed away. Died about a week ago. I don't know, some of you guys don't even know this cat in this picture. Sorry, this couple. I should have been more respectful. Ron and Becky moved here about the same time a lot of people moved here to help. And Ron died last week in Phoenix. Let me give you a quick example. Ron and Becky lived in Ohio. Had a successful teaching career, both of them. Retired, okay? I don't know what you plan to do in your retirement. I don't know what I plan to do. I don't know what you think you're capable of. I don't know what that's the point of this morning, what you're actually capable of. They moved down here, and Ron was a licensed counselor, and he got registered in the state of Louisiana. Before we had this building going, before we had any type of momentum necessarily, Ron got registered with the state of Louisiana. We rented a little office, and he started counseling after Katrina. That was up and running before a daycare, before bounce parties. Actually, he helped us buy the inflatables out of Ohio. So he got this thing running, and he was the oldest one in the group, older than Matt and Abby and myself and whatnot. So his second career, after retiring from a school, he came down here to get this going because he knew people after Katrina and everything that had gone on could use just some one-on-one time with a dude that knew something about psychology and the world of counseling and actual therapy. If that wasn't enough, he gets his ability, his endorsement to be a counselor trainer And he starts bringing interns in that are getting their master's degrees. Great example of training up the next generation. He's old, he's on his way out. That wasn't enough. He gets the 20-year-olds that are in school and the 30-year-olds to help them train up. Great second career, right? Retires from this. Then he starts helping military families that are shipping out. He goes and starts doing counseling for them in Gulfport at the base. And then he started doing that in Phoenix when he really retired again. I didn't know, we talked to Becky on the phone last night. I didn't know that he had retired again from counseling in last calendar year, May of 2022. They have been having foster babies. Did you guys know this? I didn't know this. For years now. So if you've gotten your kids out of the house and you've coached them in some sports and you've done your thing and you've retired, and you got another career to help other people, then you open your house because your grandkids are over all the time, but you decide we're going to help care for foster babies, babies that have been ignored, affected by drug use by their parents. And I didn't know this. They have a little 8-month-old baby that they're still caring for. And Becky got choked up on the phone and said he was great with her. They would, the baby would lay on the bed and he would like snuggle with her, make her laugh and all this kind of stuff. And she was getting choked up. And I thought to myself, literally, to his dying day, helping other people. Was that guy perfect? No. He coached Little League. Are you a coach? I don't know. Deb and Sean aren't here today because they're coaching soccer teams. Is that the thing for you? Is it the thing for me? I don't know. I just want to throw out a couple examples. Maybe you don't know what you're capable of. I kind of knew his story, but I didn't know what he was capable of, and he kept going all the way till he died. And he took care of a foster baby that was affected by drug use, malnourished, and the phrase failure to thrive. And they were just pouring into that little girl, trying to make sure she made it.